To discuss the role of intermittent fasting to facilitate weight loss, including the science behind intermittent fasting, how it works in practice, side effects and tips for what you could eat, and also foods to try and avoid. Now, before we get into the main section of the video, I do want to stress that I've designed this as a general educational resource. It's not a clinical advice video, and I'd strongly suggest that if you do have a medical condition, such as diabetes, and you're thinking about making changes to your diet, you should first discuss this with your healthcare provider, especially if you're taking medication. Well, put quite simply, intermittent fasting involves cycling between periods of fasting and eating. And there are two main ways of doing this in practice, and we'll discuss these in more detail later in the video. These are essentially called the 5-2 or 6 fasting in the next section of the video. But in a nutshell, when you fast, you use up stored energy by burning excess body fat, and this results in weight loss. So, basic understanding of what intermittent fasting is. Why don't we briefly look at the science behind intermittent fasting? Because I do think that it's worth trying to understand what the theory behind intermittent fasting is to try help us make sense of how this particular form of dieting does help us to lose weight. So when we eat, we take in more energy from food than can immediately be used by the body. A hormone called insulin is produced when we eat, which breaks down carbohydrate into glucose. Glucose can then be used by the cells for energy, or it can be stored in the liver or muscle as glycogen. When we need a quick source of energy, or the body's not getting glucose from food, the glycogen is released from the liver and broken down into glucose and sent into the bloodstream. However, there's limited storage space for glycogen, and once stores are full, the liver will turn excess glucose into fat. Now, some of this fat will be stored in the liver, or it will be exported to other fat deposits in the body. Now, when you fast, the insulin levels fall. This signals the body to start burning stored energy, and one of these stored energy sources that the body can use is glycogen in the liver, and the body will use that first as it's most accessible. After the glycogen's been used up, the body will start to break down fat to get the energy that it needs. If we start to burn the stores of energy, such as the glycogen or fat, then in theory we should lose weight. So now we know a little bit more about the science behind intermittent fasting. Well, what are the different methods for fasting? Well, the two most well-known methods for intermittent fasting are the 5-2 diet. This is where you normally eat for 5 days a week, then eat only around 500 to 600 calories on the other 2 days. The second option is time-restricted eating, where you have a long period in the day when you don't eat. With the time-restricted eating, most people choose something called a 16-8 cycle. This involves not eating for 16 hours of the day, then having an 8-hour eating window, and generally this diet form is done daily or almost daily. Intermittent fasting can help you lose body fat as it works out to approximately a 25% total calorie deficit for the week. However, you do need to be mindful of the foods that you're eating in the fed state. If you overeat or you're eating high calorie foods, then you won't see the weight reduction that you're looking for. So now we know a little bit more about the two main practical methods for intermittent fasting. Why don't we look at 5 foods that you might want to consider incorporating into your diet, and also 5 foods to try and avoid. So for the days and times that you're not fasting, you're going to want to try and keep your diet in line with general healthy eating guidelines. And to help you with this, I'm going to highlight some key food groups that you might want to consider. So the first are whole grains. These come under your starchy carbohydrates, and these will provide slow release of glucose into the bloodstream. They're also an important source of fibre, vitamins and minerals, and examples of these are oats, whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, as well as brown rice. Now the second food group are lean meats and fish, and these are important because they're packed full of protein, and this is essential for the growth and repair of muscles and tissues. The best kinds are lean meats such as skinless chicken and low-fat turkey. White fish such as haddock or cod are lean sources of protein, and oily fish like salmon, sardines, tuna, mackerel, they're full of omega-3 fatty acids, which are important for brain and heart health. Now the third food group to consider are dairy products, which can be a rich source of calcium, which is really important for bone health, but you should try to choose low-fat varieties of dairy products, things like skimmed milk and low-fat Greek yogurt. The fourth group are obviously fruits and vegetables. These provide us with an important source of vitamins, minerals, as well as fibre. And finally, lentils, beans and pulses are also good because they're low in fat and they're an important source of protein, fibre, as well as vitamins and minerals. Now, those are the 5 food groups that I think you should try and incorporate into your diet. But some people will ask, well, what foods should I avoid? Well, on an intermittent fasting diet, foods that you should avoid are things like refined